Okay, so on notes 5.1, we are multiplying polynomials. A polynomial is the sum of monomials, which means more than one term. So on this first one, notice we have two terms times two terms, so a binomial times a binomial. We will be using FOIL anytime we're multiplying a binomial times a binomial. So if you remember from Algebra 1, FOIL, the F represents the first term, outside term, inside terms, and last terms. Okay, so that's the order that we multiply them. So we'll multiply the first two terms together. That would equal 12x squared. And then we'll multiply the outside terms together. So 4x times a negative 2 would give you a negative 8x. And then the inside terms, you would get positive 3x. And then the last terms, you would get negative 2. So once you've used FOIL, you're going to combine like terms. So notice on like terms, remember it's the same variable, the same exponent. So notice we do not have another x squared term besides the 12x squared. So I'm going to bring it down. And we can combine those x's, which would give us negative 5x. And then we're bringing down that minus 2. So there would be our answer there. Okay, so number 2. Notice it looks a little different because we have two terms and then we have three terms. We're going to multiply this first term by x squared, which would give us x cubed, because when you're multiplying, you're adding the exponents. And then we'll still stay on that x, and we'll multiply it by the next term, which would give us 4x squared. And we're going to be adding everything up. Then we take x and we times it by 16, which would be 16x. And then we're going to take negative 4, and we're going to multiply it by everything. So that would be negative 4x squared. And then that would be negative 16x. And that would be negative 64. So we're going to combine like terms. Notice we have an x cubed, but there's not another x cubed, so that'll be my first term. We have a 4x squared. Notice we do have another x squared. It's negative 4x squared. 4 minus 4 gives us 0, so those two cancel out. And then we have 16x minus 16x, which also cancels. And so we're just left with that minus 64 there. Okay, so now we're going to look at some special cases where we can multiply the polynomials mentally. The only way that we can do this mentally on this in these examples is if we have a single variable. So notice that single we talked about before, it's a variable without a coefficient in front. So if it's just like a 1x, that means it's single. So if you have a binomial times a binomial and you have single variables, then you can use this method. First, to get the first term, you're going to square the variable. So that's going to be x squared. To get your middle term, you're going to add the two numbers in parentheses. So that's going to give us a positive 1. We need to, on that middle term, when we add those two numbers, we also need to put an x with it. And then to get your last term, we will multiply the two numbers in parentheses. So that would give us a negative 6. If you had used FOIL, combined like terms, then you should end up getting the same answer. Okay, so notice on 4 we have single variables. So to get the first term, we're going to square the variable, so x squared. We're going to add the two numbers in parentheses, so that's going to give me a 0. So I won't write 0x, because there's not an x term there. When you multiply them, you get negative 16. So you will not end up with that middle term there. Okay, so 5, 6, and 7 you can try on your own. It's very similar to what we just went over on 3 and 4. And then notice on 8, it looks a little different. If you notice on 8, we have two terms, and then on the outside of those parentheses, we have squared. That's called a binomial squared. Okay, when you're squaring a term, whether it be one term or two terms, that means you're multiplying it by itself. So this right here is the same thing as x plus 3 times x plus 3. That means the same thing. Anytime you have a binomial squared, your answer will be a trinomial, which is 3 terms. Okay, so you're not just squaring x and squaring 3 and that's your answer. You will have a middle term. So notice here, these are both single variables, so we can actually use that method that we were just talking about. So we get x squared. We add your two numbers in parentheses, which would give us 6x. And then we multiply them to get 9. So we should end up with 3 terms when we're squaring a binomial. Okay, so if you look at number 9, that would be the same thing as 2x minus 1 times 2x minus 1. So here we couldn't use that method because we don't have single variables, but we could use FOIL. But I'm going to show you another way of doing it anytime you have a binomial squared. To get your first term, you will square this first term in parentheses, so that would be 4x squared. Because remember, when you're squaring, you need to square the 2 and the x. To get your middle term, you'll multiply these two terms together, which would be negative 2x, but you would have to double it because there would be 2 of those, so that would make negative 4x. And then you'll be squaring this last term, which would give you a positive 1. So I'll write those steps down for you. So you're going to take the first term and square it. You're going to multiply your terms in parentheses, and then you're going to double it. So you're going to multiply it by 2, and then you're going to square that second term in parentheses. So let's try that on number 10. We could do what we did on number 8 on number 10, but let's practice what we used on 9. So any binomial squared, all you have to do is square the first term, so that's x squared. Then you'll multiply the numbers in, or terms inside parentheses. That would give you negative 5x, but you have to double it because there would be 2 of them. So times it by 2, which would give you negative 10x. And then when you square the negative 5, you get positive 25. Okay, so you can try 11 and 12 on your own. And let's look at 13. So notice on 13 we have 3 binomials here. Okay, so it's just like regular numbers. If you're multiplying 3 numbers together, you would multiply 2 of them, get an answer, multiply it by the third one. Same thing here. So I'm going to just multiply these first 2 binomials together. So notice they have single variables, so I can use the method that we learned on the front. So that's x squared. Add the 2 numbers to get 5x. Multiply them to get 6. Okay, so I need to multiply that by x minus 4. Okay, I'm just going to rewrite this as x minus 4 times x squared plus 5x plus 6. That way my binomial is first. It's the same thing though. Okay, so x times x squared, we're going to get x cubed. X times 5x, we're going to get 5x squared. X times 6, we get 6x. Then we have a negative 4 times x squared is a negative 4x squared. Negative 4 times 5x is a negative 20x. And negative 4 times 6 is a negative 24. Okay, so we're going to combine like terms. So notice we have an x cubed, but we don't have another one, so I'm going to rewrite that. We have a 5x squared. We can combine that with negative 4x squared, so that would make 1x squared. And then we have 6x minus 20x, which would make negative 14x. and then we have left minus 24. So when you're multiplying 3 different binomials together, multiply 2 of them, doesn't matter which 2, get an answer, and then multiply it by that third one. Okay, so let's take a look at 14. I'm going to erase this part here so I have more room. There we go. Okay, so notice on this one, we have a plus b and it's cubed. Okay, when we talked about squared, we were multiplying it by itself. When we have cubed, that means that we're multiplying by itself 3 times. So this is the same thing as a plus b times a plus b times a plus b. Okay, so we're going to multiply, it's very similar to 13 that we just looked at. We're going to multiply the first 2. And then we'll take that and multiply by the third one. So since I'm dealing with 2 different variables here, I'm going to go ahead and use FOIL. But you could use the single method or the single variable method that we talked about. So I'm going to do a times a, which is a squared. And then I'm going to do a times b. When you're multiplying a variable by times a different variable, you're always going to put the one that comes first in the alphabet. So that would be plus ab. And then b times a, we're going to get ab. And then b squared, we're going to get, or b times b, we get b squared. Okay, so we're going to combine like terms. Notice on the insides here, we can combine the ab's. This is a 1ab, this is a 1ab. So that would be a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. Okay, so we multiplied the first 2. Now I'm going to take that and I'm going to multiply it by the third one. So you can either put it in front here or you can put it at the back. Okay. All right, we're going to do a times a squared, which is a cubed. A times 2ab would be 2a squared b. A times b squared would be a b squared. B times a squared would be a squared b. B times 2ab would be 2ab squared. And then b times b squared would be b cubed. Okay, so now we're going to combine like terms. So we have an a cubed. Notice there is not another a cubed, so I'm going to write it down. We have a 2a squared b. You're looking for another a squared b. Notice we have one here, and that's a 1. So that would make 3a squared b. Then we have a positive 1ab squared, so we're looking for another ab squared, and we have this one here. So that would make 3ab squared. And then we have left b cubed. Okay, so since we had a binomial cubed here and they were both variables, the terms were both variables with no numbers, we could actually use this as a formula for any binomial cube that we have. We would call the first term a, the second term b, and we could use this answer here as a formula to plug in to make it a little easier for us. If you don't like using the formula, that's fine. Just multiply 2 of them, get an answer, and multiply it by the third one. Okay, so let's look. 15. Notice we have a binomial cubed. So I'm going to write this formula that we just found on the front. A cubed, let me erase that, plus 3a squared b plus 3ab squared plus b cubed. Okay, so I'm going to call this first one a and then the second one b. So to get my answer, all I would need to do is do a cubed so a is x, so that's x cubed, plus 3, I'm looking at this formula up here at the top, so 3a squared, a is x, so that's x squared, times it by b, which is 2. This is all one term here. Moving on to the next term, so plus 3, a is x, and b squared, so that would be 2 squared. Plus, now moving on to the last one, b cubed, so that would be 2 cubed. Okay, so now I'm going to multiply and then get my answer. So notice I have an x cubed. I can't do anything else with that. This is all one term, so I'm going to multiply those numbers together. So that would give me a positive 6x squared. Notice here 2 squared is going to give us 4, and that's all one term. So I would need to multiply those, which would give me a positive 12x. And then 2 cubed is 8. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 we get 8. So there's our answer. If you don't like using the formula, that's fine, but you would need to make sure you do x plus 2 times x plus 2 times x plus 2. Multiply the first two, get an answer, and then multiply by that third one. Okay, let's look at 16. Notice we have a binomial cubed. I'm going to use the formula again. So here's our formula. So we're going to cube the a. Our a is going to be 2x. Our b is going to be negative 1. So when I cube 2x, 2 cubed is 8. X cubed is x cubed. Plus 3, notice on our formula is a squared. I'll just write that step. And then b. Plus 3a, which is 2x, and then times b squared. And then plus b cubed, so negative 1 cubed. Okay, so I have an 8x cubed. And then I'm going to work this out here. When I square x and 2 there, that's going to give me 4x squared. So I have 3 times 4x squared times a negative 1, which would give me negative 12x squared. Looking at this here, negative 1 squared is going to give me a positive 1. 3 times 2x times 1 is a positive 6x. And then negative 1 cubed is a negative 1 times a negative 1 times a negative 1. That actually gives you a negative 1. Okay, so let's go over these last two. So 17, just going to write it right down here so I have more room. This is going to be a, this is going to be b. So I'm going to do a cubed, so x cubed, plus 3 times a squared, which is x squared, times b, which is a negative 1, plus 3 times a, which is x, times b squared, plus b cubed. So that would be x cubed minus 3x squared. Negative 1 squared here is going to give me a positive 1, so that would make positive 3x. And then negative 1 cubed is a negative 1. Okay, so you can try 18. When you try 18, you should get 27. Let's erase that. X cubed plus 54x squared plus 36x plus 8.